Welcome to Sparks with Rabbi Akiva.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay. Today's teaching is sort of inspired by a thoughts of negativity that and disappointment of what is occurring in America today. And without getting political, and by political, friends, I mean the ins and outs, the distortions of what is going on is always founded on bases of morals and ethics. So I don't want to talk about the political side, but the underpinnings of what is occurring in America. This is what was the spark that led to today's teaching. And it has to do with how we view what is the Jewish attitude towards violence and military force. What is going on in the streets of America today, in certain cities, where it is accelerating to an obscene level, propelled me to think about what the cumulative Jewish perception of force, guns, acts of violence. Where do we stand? Where can we glean some principled, elemental ideas of what the Jewish attitude towards all of this is? And it brought me back, to of course, back to the Torah, and back to some of the most ancient and seminal teachings that appear in the genesis of the Jewish people and our history. So we're going to use a biblical verse and a biblical episode to kind of spread our wings in terms of elaborating on the principles of how we view military force throughout our history. And it goes back to the story that you all know regarding our patriarch Jacob, who leaves his home. Jacob had already left his home long before this, when he steals the birthright with the help of his mother, which is another story, with the help of his mother, and is forced to leave the home of his birth, his parents' home, and he escapes the wrath of his twin brother Esav, and he escapes for a good 20 years to the house of his father-in-law to be, Lavan, and sets up shop in a totally different territory, and escapes the comfort of his home, and is living separate and kind of solitary. It's kind of a little reminiscent of Moses also, who is forced to leave his own home and escape to Midian, and a really nice chunk of his life is lived away, and then actually returns. And actually it's reminiscent of Abraham, right, who also is forced to leave his home. So if you have that imagery in mind, this is a common thread of individuals being compelled to go on their own journey, create, so to speak, their own destiny, and then actually, after X amount of time, come back to their home and reestablish themselves. Jacob is living quite comfortably in the proximity of his father-in-law. He already has most of his children in and around the proximity of Lavan, and he's living his life. He's living a good life. And then he is called back home. And he packs up his family and all of his possessions and wealth that he accumulated in those 20 years, and then discovers that as he is getting closer and closer to home, he discovers and he hears that his twin brother Esav is ready to meet him, not greet him, but to meet him with a band of 400 armed men. And Jacob doesn't know what to think. Doesn't know what to think. He really is in a little doubt whether his brother is actually going to greet him or to meet him in war. Why else would he have 400 armed men there? Okay, this is another true example of the thread that runs through the entire book of Genesis, and that being one of sibling rivalry. It runs through the entire book of Genesis. Also a lesson, a whole lesson in and of itself. Jacob finds himself in a position where everything he has, everything he owns is being possibly threatened. Everything is at stake. And the Torah records like that moment in time when they are about to confront each other. And the verse says, Vayira Yaakov, Vayetzer lo, which means Vayera Yaakov, and Jacob was very afraid. Vayetzer lo, and Jacob was extremely or exceedingly distressed. So somebody asked me a question. It's one of these perpetual questions. I see Corona Goddess Margot. Margot, was your hand up? No. Okay. she was scratching her cheek. Vayira Vayetzer, the commentaries ask, what is this double expression? Everybody knows. I mean, this you all should know. Everybody knows that the Torah is exceedingly sparing with her words. And Vayira means, and Jacob was afraid. Vayetzer lo, and he was distressed. What is the word distressed adding to the word, and he was afraid? It must be referring to something else, some nuance that Vayira, that the word, and Jacob was afraid, did not include.
Rabbi Akiva, what
Yes.
is the shorish for ye? Is that from the same shorish as Yotzer?
No. It's the shorish's Vayetzer is from the word tsar, like as in Mitzrayim. Tsar means narrow or constricted, which is translated as distress.
And then
Tsar is distress.
and the yira is both awe and fear.
Fear.
It's not just being scared though.
It also means scared. It can also mean scared.
Okay.
Rabbi Akiva,
Yes.
Yetzer, that's a whole different Yetzer than like Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov. It's a different sharish.
Yes. Yes.
Word. Okay, thanks. That's it.
So the question is the multiplicity of these two words. What does Vayetzer add to Vayira? And he was afraid. He was trembling. So Rashi answers like this. Rashi says, Vayera Yaakov, and he was afraid. Rashi says he was afraid of being killed by Esav. And Vayetzer lo, and he was distressed. Rashi says he was distressed lest he himself is put in a position to kill others, which is very beautiful. That Jacob is he's juggling two types of fears. The first fear is for his life. I'm sorry, for his life. He is afraid of being killed. And the second one is he is afraid that if and when he defends himself, he is compelled and forced to kill others. Jacob is in this dilemma. Either outcome, whatever is going to happen here with his brother Esav, whether it's victory or defeat, somehow this situation is going to yield a disastrous outcome, either way it goes. And that's the emotional state that Jacob is in. Vayira, he's afraid of being killed. And Vayetzer lo, he's afraid of actually committing a murder. Just as an aside, there is another version of this midrash that Rashi is quoting that says something like extremely startling. This other version of the same commentary does it in the opposite order. Not that Jacob, Vayira Yaakov, and Jacob is afraid first of being killed. The second version is really like amazing. It really is. It's startling, in fact. The second version of this same midrash is that Vayira refers to first Jacob is afraid of killing others. And then Vayetzer lo is referring to he himself being killed. Okay, which do you get that nuance? He is more afraid of killing others than he is of being killed himself. But regardless of that, Jacob is in a terrible emotional situation. Friends, right at the beginning of the Torah, we are taught that our patriarch Jacob is in fear of taking another's life. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two that we can derive from this is that from the beginning of Jewish history, from the seeds of patriarchal morality, we see clearly an aversion to violence and a disdain for weapons in general. We also see later on in Jacob's life, when this is well after this incident, when the Torah records the incident when his only daughter, Dinah, is taken captive by another foreign tribe and is raped. And without getting into the whole story, we all remember that after this incident, two of Jacob's sons, Shimon and Levi, what do? They make, without getting into it, they make a false treaty with the people, with this tribe, the people of Shechem, and they make a treaty with them and insist that they all circumcise themselves in order to make amends and to create a partnership. And while they are all sick on the third day of circumcision, Shimon and Levi come in and they destroy that tribe and they kill them all in an act of vengeance for the rape of their sister. What is Jacob's reaction to that? Jacob's reaction is so overt, is so uncompromising that his statement at the end of his life, remembering this act of Shimon and Levi's, when he is on his deathbed, Jacob cannot forget this horrendous act of violence on the part of Shimon and Levi, and he includes in his blessing more admonishment and more curses than ever. We rarely see something so vicious in the entire Torah, spoken from a father to his children. He says, and I quote, this is part of Jacob's farewell message to Shimon and Levi, when he says, their weapons are tools of lawlessness. Let me not be included in their counsel. Let not my being be counted in their assembly. Cursed be their anger, so fierce, and so fierce, and their wrath so relentless. Friends, the imagery that comes out of these two incidences is that to the Jewish sensibility, weapons are worthy of Esav, not Jacob. What is the consummate definition of the essence of Jacob is said later on in the Torah. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov. How good are the tents of Jacob. Jacob is described as a Yoshev Ohalim. He is a dweller in tents, which means tents Rashi explains is tense is the gentle place. Tense is symbolic of the tense of learning, of study, not of weapons and not of war. Esav, his twin brother, is described as Ish Tzayid. He is a man of hunting and of weaponry. There is a gentleness associated with Jacob, and there is a violence, a tendency of violence and a propensity towards war associated with Esav. And that association runs through our history, as the Talmud says, for a long time. I want now to introduce a really nearly absurd association that is made in the Mishnah and the Talmud regarding violence, regarding weaponry, that comes from a place where you would have least expected. It comes from a halachic place, and it just goes to teach us, friends, that sometimes in Jewish law and in Jewish observance and in Jewish ritual lies a fundamental moral and ethical teaching coming out of ritual observance, and we'll see what I mean very soon. There is a law, a halacha, regarding Shabbat, that carrying a sword or a bow and arrow or a shield or a lance or a spear on Shabbat outside of your domain on Shabbat is prohibited. Carrying objects out of your domain was considered quote unquote work on Shabbat. Okay, it was a violation of Shabbat to carry things outside of your domain. So carrying a sword, a bow, and a shield was prohibited. There's a second opinion in the Talmud that suggests that carrying a sword or a spear or a bow and arrow, because they are ornaments, it's allowed. It's allowed. Without getting into it, can you hear the dispute here? On one level, the first opinion is that they cannot be carried because they are carrying something out of their domain that is unnecessary. And we're not talking here about self-protection, but we're talking just about carrying. on the other level, Rabbi Eliezer says, no, a sword or a spear or a shield is like is something tantamount to like carrying an ornament on your carrying like a star on your boot. Is like carrying jewelry, and jewelry is part, can be considered part of the body. Therefore, it would not be considered like carrying. So you have to have an appreciation for this. When Rabbi Eliezer said that I disagree, swords and such things can be carried because they can be considered like ornaments, the first opinion, the sages, will have none of that. And they immediately attack Rabbi Eliezer's logic, and their words are so fierce and impassioned in the Talmud. And they say to Rabbi Eliezer, a person's weapons are nothing but an insult to the bearer of them. How do we know that? And the sages continue and they say, we know that from the prophet Isaiah, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation, and they shall know of war no longer. It's crazy. They are taking a messianic a dream, and they are saying that the prophet Isaiah is saying that weaponry and any vessel that has to do with, that can impose any sort of harm or violence or murder or anything that can be injurious to any other person is an insult to the person who is bearing them. And therefore you, Rabbi Eliezer, in no way can say or even think of a gun or a sword or a spear to be an ornament, because one day, as Isaiah prophesizes, that every sword will be turned into a plowshare. The big vision and the big dream is that swords will become extinct. And the logic of the sages is on Shabbat, which is a day representative in miniature of the Messianic era. Shabbos has a little bit of the the Messianic era, of the tranquility and peace of the Messianic era in it. On Shabbat, carrying such a thing as a sword, an object of violence, is an antithesis to the whole idea of Shabbat. Now, so far, any comments or questions? Okay.
Did you want to maybe let her talk about what was Jacob's original reaction to the murder of Dinah, not his deathbed reaction?
Same.
Okay.
Same. He was terribly angry. Terribly angry. So I thought that all of you would have a question. The question is, does that mean, if it is true what I am saying, does that mean that Jewish tradition advocates perfect and absolute pacifism? Is Judaism a pacifist religion? Or to put it more succinctly, if it is true what I am saying, then how and why is it permissible for us as Jews in ancient times, in middle of our history, and today to use arms and military might in order to protect ourselves? And the response is that Judaism and Jewish tradition is far from being a pacifist religion. We have established long, long time ago, in the words of the Talmud, haba lahargecha, if someone rises up to kill you, then the Talmud says, then hasten to kill him first. It is not voluntary. It is not a choice of yours. If someone aggressively comes to kill you, habala hargacha, kum, you have to hasten and arise to kill him first. This, in our case, is a justification for Jacob to have, okay, he was afraid, but he had no choice, because Judaism is not an absolute pacifist religion, as others might have been. What Judaism does emphasize is that when we have to commit justified killing, we have to realize that justified violence is nevertheless tragic. That's what Jacob was afraid and distressed about. Even though he was justified in taking up arms first and attempting to the best of his ability to overpower the forces that were out to kill him, nevertheless, Jacob maintained that was going to be for him tragic. And therein lies that Jewish sensibility, period. You know, friends, when the modern, I'm going back to the early 1900s, when there was a great the dream. We're going back to the time of Herzl in Europe in the early 1900s. There were leaders, rabbinic leaders in Palestine at that time in Palestine. Right? It wasn't Israel yet, but it was Palestine. There were great leaders who in the early days embraced the Zionistic dream of world Jewry coming back to their land. And they were, you have to transport yourself. It's nearly, it's very difficult. You have to transport yourself to a time and a place where Israel did not yet exist, and the history that we know of the modern day of Israel didn't occur yet. We have to go back to that time, and we have to put ourselves in the shoes of those leaders in Israel, in Palestine. There were opinions in the early 1900s and in the decades following that were so in opposition of envisioning a return back to Israel, a return back to Palestine, and a 2,000-year-old dream coming true. They could not, the leaders in Israel, the rabbinic leaders and the spiritual leaders in Israel could not imagine coming back to the land of Israel and to a culture of the sword, of Israel finally, after 2,000 years, coming back and having to use force and violence to come back to their land. They just could not have imagined it. Two of those that could not imagine that was actually Rabbi Jacob Reines, who was one of the great Zionistic sages and rabbis in the early 1900s, and the other one was our friend and our teacher Abraham Isaac Cook. Their envisionment of the Jewish people coming back to their homeland and having sovereignty over the land, it was nearly an impossible thought for them to have thought that we are going to come back to the land and have to use military force to defend the land. In those days, there was a certain, I would have to call it actually a certain naivete that and it was very widespread. It was very widespread that our coming back after 2,000 years to the land of Israel, 48 didn't occur yet, so we're talking like pre, that our coming back to the land was not going to be contingent on Israeli prowess for military activity. They were under the impression or illusion that when we come back, somehow the entire world, either through the British Mandate or what later turned out to be the UN, that we were going to come back to the land under peaceful conditions, and that as we come back to the land somehow, somewhere, the Messianic era was going to be unfolding very, very quickly, and that there would be no battle to ensuing to protect the land, as history later showed us. The early Zionists, especially in the religious camps, were under the impression that Israel was going to maintain what they called the culture of the book, not the culture of the sword. In fact, Rav Kook does a little interplay on the verse from Isaiah that I just quoted, that your swords shall turn into plowshares and your spears into pruning hooks. Rav Kook wrote that when we find, he's writing in 1923. Rav Kook writes that, and this is a play on Isaiah's words. He writes that our swords will be melted into pens. We will be writing books. We will be teaching ourselves, and we will be teaching the world not through force, not through swords. We will be melting down our swords into pens, and we will resurrect ourselves as the people of the book. We will be recognized, our morality and ethics and our contribution will be recognized through the pen, through the written word, through teaching, through wisdom, through Torah, not through sword, not through grenades, not through nuclear warheads. Friends, so we have these two basic principles. The first principle is we are anti-violence. We fundamentally believe that it is through words that we will ultimately be able to acquire our land and acquire peace in our land through words. And the last contingency is that we are going to have to defend our sovereignty and our land through violence. That's the last thing on our minds. And that ultimately has become our present day nightmare. We are battling our preferred way of dealing with threats around us. And we have, like Jacob, we have been compelled and forced into using force and violence. And the battle in Israel today is, I mean, there is no disagreement whatsoever that in terms of the principle, haba lahargecha, if someone comes to kill you, you stand up quickly and hasten to kill them before they kill you. There is no doubt that that is the established principle in Israel today. Security first. But we don't want that. The question of left and right in Israel today is to what extent do we relish? To what extent do we applaud military might? The left in Israel is in total agreement that security first. Same with the right. Same with the right in Israel. There is no one that disagrees. The disagreement is a nuanced disagreement where is weaponry. I mean, there are elements in Israel that once weaponry is needed, there's an element in Israel that takes it to an extreme, and the left calls them out on that extreme. But generally speaking, friends, I must say that this balance in Israel has been juggled ingeniously. Israel today maintains a type of military prowess that includes the vision and the dream of pacifism. You all know that before a bombing this is so in the spirit of Jacob. Before a bombing takes place, a necessary bombing takes place, a targeted bombing in Gaza takes place. You all know this. Tens of thousands of pamphlets are dropped the evening before the bombing, so civilians are forewarned to get out of the way. That is original Jacob. Vayira vayetzer lo. Jacob is distressed. Jacob is tormented when we have to do what is necessary for our own security and our own self-preservation. Now, to bring that back to the distressing scenario that is bursting out in cities in America, we have pockets, and I'm afraid that they are not going to remain small pockets unless something is done about it. We have pockets in America that are on the other end of Jacob's model, that are praising violence, that are advocating a type of aggressiveness that America has never seen before. We have never seen such extreme aggression within the borders of America before. There used to be little pockets of crazies. It is spreading now, and I am fearful. America is slowly transforming in front of our faces, and something drastic, a drastic voice is going to have to be heard in order to quash this thing that if not restricted, if not constricted, is going to transform America into somewhat of a civil war. America is not going to be the America that we are used to if we're not careful. So, friends, I hear we refuse always the absolute pacifism. That is not part of our agenda. But we also have to remember our ancestor Jacob, who was tortured by the thought that he might have to exercise violence upon another. And we have to remember the lesson of Jacob, that even an unavoidable tragedy is nevertheless a tragedy. And we ought to be distressed, and we ought to be afraid of violence going amok without restriction and without ethical and moral boundaries. And I'll take any comments or questions now.
Sandy has her hand up now. Bruce will come back and ask if your question is, if you want to put that out. So Sandy, go first.
I've been involved with and I've been friends with people that are in the Israeli army over the years. And something that I learned that I always found was very important in my mind is that when you have people that are going to have a weapon in their hands, you have to find a way of teaching them something about using that weapon. And in Israel, everyone who is going to be an officer must study the Holocaust so that they understand that we as Jews are not allowed to do to others what people did to us during the Holocaust and anything else in our history. They actually have to see the pictures and study it so that when they are leading a troop, they know what they can or can't do or allow their people, their men to do. And I find that very interesting. And maybe they should start teaching the police in the United States about the horrors of what they could put on other people's heads, and maybe they'll think twice about not doing it so much. The other thing I wanted to say is that every time I hear the word Palestine, I want us to be reminded, and especially to tell our grandchildren and children, we did not take away the country from Palestine or from Palestinians. In 70 CE, when the Romans took over what they called Palestinia and marched our people into Rome, they named the land Palestinia. The people that have been in this land before Israel became Israel are the nomads and the landowners who the nomads used to rent things from. There is no Palestine. There is an Israel.
Very true, Sandy. Very, very true.
And Bruce has his hand up.
Rabbi, in the early 60s, when the Vietnam War was in action, I went into the Army Reserves, and there I was taught to be a soldier. The reserves require 6 months active duty in which you go to boot camp and train to learn about a rifle and walking, hiking, marching, and a number of other things. In my case, learning to fire cannons. Never, to my recollection, in the entire time, from the time that I was inducted to the time that I was released with an honorable, quote, discharge, did I ever think about killing anyone? Point one, only 2 points. Second point, historically, for the past 2,000-3,000 years, there's been an artery that has evolved, symbolically speaking, through civilization, which includes the need for human beings, not all, to have land, possessions, arms, to protect the land and arms and people within their boundaries, and leaders, conquerors, others through the monarchies and so forth. Till today, there is that artery that flows through us to jump up into our mind or brain. We have the notion of war, many, many wars over the human civilization, wars, and it's inculcated in society. People incorporate it, embrace it, analyze it variously. But that overriding large group wars has been longer than television, that's for sure,
Yeah.
or computers. And many people have many different reactions to this artery, which sometimes breaks open. And there's confusion, there's fear, there's hostility, there's all kinds of emotions and attitudes and behaviors. And right now I feel like I'm going through basic training.
Uh-huh.
I don't feel when we were going crawling on the ground in boot camp with a 50 millimeter or 30 millimeter machine gun right over our heads with Bob, and I never had experienced and never have war, so I'm a virgin. But the point is that what impact and the media and society and tend to, if not glamorize, exploit, or in some cases represent fairly accurate details, but it's a mixture. And there we are with a mixture.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for, I can hardly see you as a soldier carrying a gun. It's like, it's a crazy imagery, Bruce Firestone carrying a gun. Chevra, you know, we used to be the David to the world's, or the Arab world's Goliath. We used to be the Nebuch, the Jews, Nebuch, the Israelis, and the rest of the world was our Goliath. After 70 years, the honest truth is, to an extent, we have become, Israel has become the Goliath to the Palestinians, David, and the Palestinians are now the Davids. The whole world is saying Nebuch, the Palestinians, Nebuch, they're the underdogs, and Israel is the big bad monster with an air force and a nuclear bomb and a military like nearly no other in the world. We are now the Goliath, and they are the Nebuch, the Davids. And Chevra, we have to be, when that transformation took place, when we morphed into the Goliath out of necessity, out of self-preservation, we turned into a Goliath, and we have the power now. Together with our power comes tremendous responsibility. As Sandy said before, comes tremendous responsibility to exercise this Jacob lesson that when we do something, when we must retaliate, there has to be an element of vayetzer. We have to be, Goliath has to be in distress for doing what we do. And in my heart of hearts, I believe that that is true of the Israeli population and the Israeli military. I believe that there is a tremendous amount of distress when we have to exercise what we have to do in terms of security. But that cognizance, that awareness, that constant feeling of whatever we do, we have to feel that distress, or else Goliath can go amok, and we can be no better and no different than the oppressors that oppressed us at one time. So that has to be a constant. Jacob here is teaching us that constant. We must exercise that. That has to be a shiviti. There has to be a distress in what we are doing for the sake of security, for the sake of our self-preservation. As I told you this 100 times, as Golda Meir once said, I hope I'm not going to be too off when I paraphrase what she said. It's not so much when she's talking to the Arab nations after the Yom Kippur War. It's not so much that we hold it against you for killing our children, as much as it is we hold it against you for making us kill your children. We feel the distress in defending ourselves by killing yours. And that was said in the true spirit of Jacob.
Rabbi, do we have time for Karen Cohen? Hit it.
Of course we do. For Karen.
Oh, Rabbi, I agree with everything you're saying. But the one thing that we aren't talking about is how you ended before the questions, which is what is happening here with people who maybe want to protest, and then other people saying that they're the militia and they're killing. And I just think I don't want to leave today and not have any discussion about that, because that's what's really on my mind right now.
Karen, I agree. Karen, I am so outraged. I am so disgusted that nobody is coming up with a solution to such a basic human situation. You know what I'll share with you. I'll share with you one of my fantasies. That I was telling one of my sons, without doing the Republican Democratic thing, somebody, why doesn't somebody in a position of power, in a position of being listened, in a political position of being listened to, why doesn't someone simply suggest that the government, this present government or the new government in possibly in November, dedicate $5 billion for a new department of social justice. Call it anything you want, but a new element within the government. And dedicate that agency to social and racial justice in America, in every city, and that there be representatives from both parties brainstorming of how to police this country on a federal level, and then on a state level. Why the first one that's going to come and say we are starting a new department that is going to address racism, systemic racism in this country, and policing in the country, and the first one that says I am going to do that is going to win the election? What's the problem? When there was Social Security was invented, when America's lagging behind in healthcare, we just aren't doing it properly. But this is going to invade our streets. It is going to divide our country like we have never seen before. Like we have never seen before. And I don't understand the silence of our leadership for rational, logical thinking. So, Karen, ich weiß nicht. I don't know. Where have all the leaders gone? I don't know. I think it's such a fundamental question, and I really do believe. I wonder where do the protesters on the street that have a legitimate cause, where do the protesters on the street think they are going with this? It obviously has to be there has to be an avenue within government, or a new department within government, to say we are going to tackle these systemic problems through words, through pen, through legislation. And I say the first leader, why doesn't our president say, I swear to you, I will create a new department addressing these exact issues if and when you get off the streets? You know what would happen? They would get off the streets and they would start doing things with words and with pens, and slow but gradual progress in these areas. But that's not being done. No one is suggesting something as simple and as rational as that. And my question is, why not? You know, there used to be a divide in Israel 25 years ago, of the right and the left, the so-called pacifists and the so-called rightists, within the last 15 years, the great divide that was occurring, that was splitting Israel mamash in half, Likud and the left, does not exist any longer in Israel. The great divide between left and right have merged. There still is a left and a right, but for the most part they have merged, and they are only disputing and arguing on smaller, more detailed issues. And in America, the divide is becoming larger and larger and larger as we speak. And to honestly and frankly, I'm pretty frightened if we don't hear a voice of a rational voice coming out sooner rather than later. But not to end on a negative, yesh tikva. There still is hope, and let's pray for a leader who is inspired enough to rectify what is broken. Okay, Kim.
Well, thank you, Rabbi Akiva. The announcements for the day, we have a whole new month of programming, and